for the Los Angeles Review of Books. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from LARB headquarters in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. As usual, speaking today with a writer whose work you may have read in The New Yorker, the Paris Review, the Mississippi Review, Ziziva, Slice, Zoetrope, or surely elsewhere, Jim Gavin, who has a new book out, his debut, a short story collection called Middlemen. And its stories are set here, for the most part, in Southern California. And it's a Southern California I don't often read written about. Jim, tell me, in your Southern California, what is the importance of Del Taco?
Right. I didn't realize how important it was to me until I kind of it started showing up in stories. And friends who would read the stories would point it out, like, oh, there it is. There's the the characters have arrived at Del Taco. And so I've since then I've had to kind of trace my, relationship to it. And basically, I ate it a ton as a kid. It was cheap. We got it 3 or 4 times a week. It was nearby. You get a big bag of tacos and eat in front of the TV, and that's kind of like was my family tableau. And so I definitely associate it with like comfort, and it has the kind of drive-through aspect of it is very much a part of the culture in Southern California. I can still picture being in the back of our shitty station wagon and yelling my order up to my father and him like messing it up, and then everyone's screaming, so I definitely have those associations. And, I grew up in Southern California, and the first time I left, I went up to Northern California for a few years, in my 20s. And I realized that when I came back down, the first thing I did was go to Del Taco, because they don't really have it up there. So it definitely is kind of I associate it with home. And then most people I know who are from Southern California are kind of loyal to it in a way that they aren't to, say, Taco Bell or any of the other terrible fast food places.
Does Del Taco count to you? Is it, from your adult perspective, albeit an adult who has a Twitter handle, Jim at Del Taco,
right.
So you can only get so much of a perspective on this. But
right.
Is Del Taco good? I mean, is the food better than a Taco Bell? I've never had Del Taco, so I'm sort of speaking from ignorance here, but I want to know.
It's really good after midnight, after you've had a few beers.
That sort of thing.
It's terrible food. It's a terrible thing to put in you on a regular basis. But I'm kind of, I don't know. I think of my parents who smoked their whole lives, and they knew it was terrible. I mean, my mom smoked through all 3 of her pregnancies, and and I know we do things to ourselves that aren't rationally know we shouldn't be doing, and fast food is definitely in that category. Taco Bell is a national chain, and it kind of relies on cheap, soulless gimmicks, whereas Del Taco has a more simple menu, and you can get fries and a burrito, and that's a true blessing.
Fries inside the burrito, not fries but fries in?
You can put the fries in the burrito yourself. I know I've heard of people who do this, so there's a lot of options.
There's a sense with Southern California that, even speaking just in terms of fast food chains, we have our own things. Like, don't go to Taco Bell, go to Del Taco, you're in Southern California. Don't go to Burger King, go to In-N-Out, you're in Southern California. What is that? I would say that every place in America has that, but I don't think they do.
I've only lived in Boston, or outside of California once, and it was for a year in Boston, and Dunkin' Donuts seemed to kind of fill that. It's terrible. It's god awful. But I didn't grow up with it. So all the kind of locals, it was just like part of their routine. And I don't know, I'm assuming other parts of the country, I was in the South for the first time this summer, and I used to always hear people talk about the Waffle House, and I thought that was like a generic term, like a diner. Right. But no, Waffle House is an actual... And it sounded very much like it's the place you go after a few drinks, just greasy and awful.
Right. They all fill the same role to some extent.
I think so. I think, I don't know, if you grew up with parents who fed you healthy food, I don't know if you'd have the same associations, but I didn't. So it's just a part of the scene, I guess.
These stories in Middlemen are, for the most part, Southern California stories. They all happen most of them happen entirely in Southern California. One of them is partially in Northern California. But there's this sense that they brought back to me, because I am not from Southern California, but I've been here about 10 years. And I get a sense of the natives here, shall we say. They think of the elements of the area that might be considered terrible elsewhere, whether it's food or freeways or what have you, and there's a certain embrace of terribleness. I don't find anything here particularly terrible, but tell me, as a native of Southern California, is there that sort of, I don't know if it's a masochistic pride, but you want to embrace the things that other people don't like about the area? Is that fair?
I think that's a really good way to put it, actually. Something like the freeways. I used to have a sales job where I was on the freeway like 6 or 7 hours a day. And, it got to me after a while, but, I don't mind it. And I don't mind driving, personally, that's kind of where I listen to music, and when I lived in Boston for a year, I didn't have a car, and I kind of realized I didn't listen to music for a year, and it kind of is depressing when you can't do that. So yeah, I never mind a drive, and I don't mind traffic per se. And it is, I don't know, it could maybe be some kind of consciously trying to be contrarian to like what are the kind of the cliches about what people complain about in Southern California. It's weird. I was talking about this with someone the other day. Like we associate LA with smog, like kind of like in a national, it's always the joke in movies and stuff. And I remember growing up, there were smog alerts, and like we couldn't have soccer practice because the sky was so brown and awful. And
we're thinking 70s, 80s, yeah. 80s smog maybe.
Yeah. And I kind of realized that's kind of not the case anymore. Like it's there seems to be a lot more clear, beautiful days here, So then there's kind of like the Hollywood stuff. I'm a sucker for all that. I find if I'm someplace and I see some character actor, I'm really excited by it. Like I don't, and I that maybe makes me a very shallow and delusional person, but fair enough.
There is sort of the intrusion of fantasy into reality in a low level way like that. Yeah. Not in the sense of I could go to this diner and be discovered and be made into a matinee idol, but I'm seeing there's a character actor in one of your stories that gets called out, M. Emmett Walsh. Right. I'm seeing M. Emmett Walsh around. That's the kind of intrusion of fantasy into reality, or maybe the welcome intrusion you get here, isn't it?
I can show you on my phone. M. Emmett Walsh.
Oh boy,
was in front of me at the post office last week. Here, I'll show you. So you can this will be live. This will be.
He's pulling up a picture really? I hope is going to be of a recognizable M. Emmett Walsh. I know M. Emmett Walsh mainly as the. Was he a cop in Blood Simple?
Yeah,
in the early Coen Brothers movie.
There he is at the post office in Culver City.
Oh, I could believe that's him. He lives over there in the Culver, you think?
Yeah, and I've seen him before. I saw him in Smart and Final. That's actually mentioned in the story. So yeah, there is those kind of weird intersections. There's the horrid aspect of Hollywood that I avoid at all costs, but that type of stuff I find fun. It's you get that sense. For me, like being in LA is, I feel like I'm like anyone who's come from any other part of the country. It's always that kind of gold rush mentality. There's like, you came here for something. There's something you're chasing.
Nobody comes to Los Angeles to go down in the world.
Exactly. And, I grew up you were born in Long Beach and grew up for the most part in Orange, California. And for me, LA and Hollywood, that all existed in my imagination as like Oz, and I still feel that way, I've definitely become more grounded in kind of just the daily aspects of Southern Cal or LA proper. And, I love those aspects as well. So
I think of M. Emmett Walsh, and you wouldn't call him a movie star, but you recognize him. I think a lot of people do. Yeah. Not just, if we were movie obsessives, of course we would know everything about him, but people know his face, I would guess. They'd have the double take, I would think. And, you look at his career, you see a hardworking actor, though not a super celebrity. Would you say that the characters in Middlemen of various professions are in some sense Emmett Walshes of whatever they do? Sort of Emmett Walshes of life. They're hanging in there and they're doing their best, but they don't consider themselves huge.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't think any of the characters are matinee idol types, and I think part of the progress of the book is that realization that they're not, they have a certain dream, and it kind of hits up to a reality, and it can be heartbreaking at the time, but I think these are characters who are slowly accepting their fate as character actors in life, and I definitely feel that way. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. We need those you need those working character actors.
Right.
And I've always been partial to them. It's kind of something actually my dad has a great, memory for actors' names, and in any bad old Western we're watching, like, he can name those guys, and I always found that really poignant that he remembered them, and maybe it's because some part of him felt like he has a closer kinship to those dudes than Gary Cooper, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, and I guess those are the type of people that I am kind of drawn to. I guess, like, right in the middle, I suppose. So
I think of I forget if it was in the book, but it was in the movie version of Fight Club. There's this Brad Pitt monologue about how the whole generation that woke up and found themselves in adulthood in the late 90s were raised to believe that they'd all be celebrities and now are seething with resentment. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but you did say just now this sense that your characters, the young ones, start off with certain dreams and have to sort of have those chiseled away. You also draw some contrast between these younger characters and their parents, the sort of working class parental generation. Do you think the parents' generation had to go through that same process, or were they building up from nothing rather than getting chiseled down from their imaginary something?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just, in terms of my own family, neither my parents went to college, and they came from kind of solid houses. And, I look at someone like my dad, he's the most kind of just selfless, happy-go-lucky guy. And here's a kid who was like at, 19, got plucked off a beach and sent to Vietnam. And, it's never something he's complained about. It's just something he did. And when he got back, all he wanted was a job. He wanted a job and a family. And, like, I don't think, I'm
reminded of a father in Middlemen who says, I just wanted to work in a place with air conditioning.
Exactly. I think the things he dreamed about he had probably more selfless dreams, to be honest. Like, and he and my mom were able to, get a house and raise me and my sisters. And I think we were raised with, I think there was an expectation to move up somehow. Like, everyone, like, I think about everyone who lived on my street, which was a nice street, ranch houses and lawns. And, but, like, it was construction workers, electricians, pool guys, and, but all their kids were like, the generation going to college and kind of expecting to do something more. And I remember in college, I always had some vague notion that I would go to law school because that seemed to be like the thing to do. And
you envisioned the sort of ladder stairway, and that pointed to law school.
Yeah. I had these kind of practical things that I thought I should be doing alongside the more dreamy aspects, like wanting to write comedy and stuff like that. So I always assumed, like, I just go to law school at some point, and I basically have almost taken the LSAT like 100 times. It just still hasn't happened. It may happen. Maybe it's some.
You're right up to the end of the plank, and then nope.
Right. So yeah, I definitely feel that my dad and maybe his generation, and specific to his circumstances, like anything not getting blown up in a jungle in Southeast Asia is kind of like, hey, it's pretty good.
That's his baseline. Is in the shit, as they say.
So, and my mom was kind of the same way. I mean, they wanted, pretty simple things, and they wanted their kids to go to Catholic school, and that was like that's what they were working for, to be able to pay tuition, to Catholic schools. And, and I think, but, I mean, I came of age, in the 90s, and I think there was kind of some expectation where like, something great was going to happen at some point, and I just never quite knew what it was or how I'd do it. And I had all these vague notions, and maybe some sense that I deserved something that I clearly didn't, and I think that's probably typical of a lot of people. I'm 36, and I think it's probably typical. And then, I don't know, you kind of go through your 20s and you get your ass handed to you a few times, and you fail and you fuck up. And, when I started writing these stories, like, I had kind of stopped imagining myself as like being a published writer, and like, it was more, these are the stories I have. I want to do it for myself. And there's some lesson in there that you can't, unless if someone had told me to think like that, it would have never happened. It had to have happened on its own. So, I mean, obviously I feel really lucky with what happened with the book and getting it published. But, the reason I finished the book, I think, is because I just was writing those stories to make some sense of my life on my own terms. I think because I had gotten to the other end of the type of mentality, you were talking about. So
right, these characters, the younger characters in your book, they're in their various points in their 20s and 30s, and I can't help but compare them to my own peer group today, who are in their late 20s, early 30s. And with us, it's more like, it seems like I don't know if we feel like we deserve things, but it's almost even worse because we have, first of all, hopelessness about certain things, like home ownership, probably off the table. Reproduction, off the table. Jobs like previous generations had, off the table. But if we were offered those jobs, we would probably wouldn't do them. We say, well, we're not going to. We've relinquished so many perks of middle-class American life in the 20th century, but we're definitely not going to be working. Like, it's the same thing, do you get the sense of what I mean? Like, is that an element of the characters, of the sort of age cohort of the younger characters in your story as well? I mean, they're various ages. They seem, I think we're probably less than 10 years apart in age, and some of the characters fall between us in terms of the time period they occupy.
I feel like post-war America, you have this prosperity, and you have your square suburban world, and in the movies and the films, like, the hero is always the person who kind of goes against that, or is the more sympathetic character who kind of, I don't want this square 9-to-5 job. I don't want this. Like, I'm, you have the beats, you have the counterculture and everything. And I think that's been the narrative all through, like, till now. I mean, it's something like American Beauty or something, which, a movie I don't really care for, but the kind of the whole Kevin Spacey's character, just like, this is all a sham. This world of, I have to go to this job, I have to raise this family. And I feel like that's over. Anyone complaining about their job, having a job in America, we don't need to listen to, and I feel like if the kind of like the crazy dream of life in America was to escape the square suburban world, the dream now is to find a way back in.
I see.
No
smoke without fire. I mean, are we forgetting something by ignoring or turning away from the lessons of Richard Yates or whoever who seemed genuinely horrified by the squareness they saw?
Yeah, I mean, Yates, the other guy I would put Evan S. Cannell in the Bridge novels, which are amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think they saw that stuff really early on. And you have someone like Cheever who writes, beautifully about the suburbs and kind of that kind of prosperous post-war world, which I think Mad Men draws on immensely from Cheever. And I assume all those writers have read a lot of Cheever, but in any case, but Cheever was an outsider to that world. I mean, he kind of grew up rough and poor, and like he loved that. Like he wrote. I think he indicts that world, but I also think he finds it beautiful and alluring. And I think that kind of makes more sense to me. I feel like in my dream of dreams, I'm just trying to get back to like what I knew as a kid. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, a house in Southern California, it just seems like fucking impossible, and I think the track I've been on in my life has been kind of, I've always imagined a conventional future for myself, but everything I've done in my life has been to kind of run away from it. So it's definitely kind of like this mixed fraught way of looking at things.
The vision was always conventional. The reality was never conventional.
Exactly. Yeah. Whether I've had several careers, and if I had stuck with any of them, I probably could have had those things, but for whatever reason, I always kind of just wanted to escape in some way, so both those impulses are familiar to me, and I don't know if there's any good answer to them.
You mentioned that you yourself had a sales job where you were on the freeway for 6 hours a day or what have you, and there's a similar job held by a character in Middlemen, working as a plumbing sales rep, driving all day long, and it's, I mean, you make in the story, you make that a profession that I want to learn more about, in the context of the story. But at the same time, if I step out of it and think to myself, someone somewhere is driving 7 hours a day every day to sell plumbing supplies, I almost can't think about the sentence. It's like it has too many grim implications. I have to force it out of my mind. Reading the story, I'm fine with it. Then I step back and think this exists as a thing that people spend most of their waking hours doing. It's like, just try not to think about it. Have you had, I mean, you held that kind of a job, I suppose, but that divide, is that familiar to you?
That story, basically I screwed up my life enough to the point where I had no other option. So I took a job with the company my dad works for. I did that for 2 years, driving 7 hours a day, making sales calls, getting my, teeth kicked in, and also having some good moments, but mostly just being in a constant level of stress because it's sales. You have to, So 2 years, I felt like I aged like a century. My father has done that for 40 years. And so that is what is totally incomprehensible to me. But the thing is, you stick with the career, you get good at it, you get to know people, and all those stresses they take different shape. But I mean, every day I'd meet these guys who were like lifers in that industry, and guys who their whole life depended on how well they could remember parts numbers. Like these guys in the warehouses, and like they have this little bit of knowledge and know-how that they kind of built a life around. And it's especially something like plumbing, no one dreams of growing up to working in plumbing, whether it's actually, being an artisan or on the sales, business industrial side of it. But it's kind of where people end up. And actually that's what I loved about it, because the people you meet, they had a certain level of humility to them that I don't think you would find in finance or
to name one example.
Yeah. So, and I had so much respect for those guys. And, I had my own kind of visions and dreams and stuff, but I've never thought they were any more valid or noble than any other. So I'd meet these like 25-year-old plumbers who like, they're all tatted up and wearing Dickies and they're making $70,000 a year and they have like 2 kids and they're 25, and they got a house out in Redlands, so I don't know, that world. I mean, it was, I guess the crazy part of it was always imagining like what my dad, like what his world was like. And then I think it was a rare gift that I actually got to see it and see how hard he worked, how hard all those people work, how scary it can be, and also how much fun it can be, like a couple of the things depicted in the couple of stories about plumbing. There's like a golf tournament and there's a luau. Like those were, I went to those things, and they were,
the luau was real.
Yeah.
The luau on the Los Angeles River.
Yeah. to go behind the scenes, the luau was not, I moved it for dramatic purposes, but I went to a luau.
The right choice.
Yeah. So the actual luau was in the Inland Empire, but
even better in a way.
Yeah, in a way. So, yeah, I find, when I was in the middle of it, I never considered writing about it. I just, who in their right mind would want to read about plumbing salesmen, and, and then at some point I had been working on stuff that was more historical and required research. And I just got tired of it. And I just came to a point in my life where I was like, I need to just write about my own life. And friends would tell me, like, I'd go on the weekends, I'd see friends and have beers and I'd tell some story from my week in my sales job. And then like, why don't you write about that? And it's really the dumbest, most simple thing you can do. But it took me a long time to actually understand what it means. And to understand that when you're writing a story about a job, there has to be something else going on, and you have to have all the details right. And I was able to do that without thinking because I just knew it. But yeah, I don't know. So in the end, I owe quite a bit to that job because any luck I've had as a writer has come out of these
right
plumbing stories.
I don't want to leave plumbing behind yet, because you mentioned the 25-year-old plumber who is pulling down money. He's got a family. That's kind of an archetype, at least in modern life. Well, for me anyway, because you always, in high school, you do see that, you dimly see the path ahead. Like you could go to college or you could get professional right away in one of these, in a trade, and you could be, they always say it could be pulling down the X amount of money that you won't see, you'll maybe never see if you don't play your cards right with a college path. And I go on Facebook and I see photos that these guys I used to know in high school up in the Seattle suburb where I grew up, who stayed there, who went into contracting or what have you. And it's like, I see pictures of their wives, their houses, their kids, their cars. And I'd be like, you're only 28 like me. That's not possible. That's not like, what did you get a MacArthur fellowship? Like what happened? How did you, what? I mean, I really don't even, I can hardly form a question that like encapsulates my mystification at that. And at some point I just think they're a different breed than you. Like they went one way, you went the other way. It could not have been otherwise. And I wonder, writing the stories in middlemen, the stories so tied up in work and working class and all that, the sort of generational divide. Do you think that is illusory, that idea that these are just two different kinds of people doing two different kinds of things, and you can't cross the paths for very long? You can take some time on one side or the other, but these are separate streams.
Like I said, like the street I grew up on had a lot of people who worked in the trades and, or, something like truck driving or whatever. And, my memory of is like, the last thing my dad ever wanted from me was to do what he did, and I had that sense, or like, you're all expected to do something else, and to do what your father did was a step back, and I think when I took the job in plumbing, and it was at a difficult juncture in my life. My mom had passed away, and I was broke. I had loose ends. I had a really weird resume, and I had and so when I started, I had high hopes. Like I was like, I'm actually gonna be able to make pretty good money for the first time in my life. I'll get my own apartment, and I did all those things, you know. But there was something else chasing after me, and it was mainly I wanted to write. You know, I hadn't written for a few years, but that was still gnawing at me, you know. And I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know what would separate. You know, I met a lot of sales reps my age. Some had gone to college, some hadn't, you know, and those guys just seemed settled in a way that I just kind of at some point realized I wasn't going to be.
Right. You never stopped chafing.
Yeah. And I don't know, the thing about I've never associated kind of like intelligence with education. And I look at someone like my dad. He's incredibly smart and he has this kind of like good artistic eye in a way, you know. And he's also kind of there's like a 0 ounce of pretension in him, you know what I mean? And so I don't know, like I never wanted to be like go to New York and be among the literati or something. Sure. I mean, that's as horrible a thought to me as, you know, digging ditches for the rest of my life. You know,
it's as poisonous for a writer as digging ditches the rest of your life.
Right. So yeah, it's a weird thing that you know, it's a funny, I met a guy, you know, who was he? Forget. He worked for a wholesaler, and we had lunch, and this was somewhere like way out in like, I don't know, Fontana or something. And we're talking about we ended up talking about movies, and, you know, and he was like, yeah, I kind of had an idea for a screenplay. Like, and we were just like, we're 2 plumbing sales reps having lunch and somewhere in the Inland Empire, but I don't know. And like, he kind of had that little bit of like, why not? You know, so I think that happens in different forms. Like maybe all those guys I thought were settled in weren't, you know, and, so yeah, I don't know. My respect and the people I care about are the people who can kind of maintain a career. Cause I haven't been able to do it. So those are the people and I'm hoping that the career I can maintain as a writer, but that remains to be seen. We'll see what happens.
Always remains to be seen in anyone's case. But I think of that I have a screenplay idea moment from an unexpected source. Yeah. And I think to the story in Middlemen, where one of your younger characters, your younger/impoverished characters, drives to Riverside on his spare tire, and then a spare that replaces his spare tire that shreds, and it drags his car there to meet with his rich uncle who got rich in the irrigation business in Riverside. And, you know, he's one of these loaded types who's writing checks to the guy's mom and all that. He's throwing his money around a bit. Mm-hmm. And we've all met types like that, I think, who these people who got wealthy in, I don't want to say unappealing, but in occupations and fields you're just never sure, like, how does that happen? You know, Riverside irrigation. And I always think about those people. And the question, I don't mean it to sound disdainful. It might come out that way. I mean it in good faith and as literally as possible. I think about these guys. What is driving them exactly? Like I know the money. I know there's money, but what's keeping them going forward to get that wealthy at irrigation in Riverside or at becoming a plumbing fixture mogul? I honestly don't know where the fire is coming from. You know, I mean, it's like, maybe this is another generational thing. I don't know. What have you had those moments?
You know, I look at like my mom's side of the family is all Boston Irish, and like, you know, grew up kind of in the slums in Boston, and I think of my grandfather, like a guy who didn't go to school past age 10, and there's like, you know, whole section of his life that I don't really know where he was in the 30s, like the Depression. I you know, there's unaccounted for years. Yes. And I have no idea, but he became a welder, and you know, his sons, well, one was killed in Vietnam and one kind of ended up working in irrigation. You know what I mean? And I think there's this kind of ancestral memory of poverty that is a driving force, and you want to escape it. And I don't know. My grandfather, when he's living in Boston, was kind of this hellion, and his mom called up Joe Kennedy, who was like a family friend, to get him a job at the post office, which it ended up working out. But that kind of that's another way these worlds work. Is it's very, you have nepotism, you have just kind of people. That's why you get into the trades. You have a brother or a father who can get you in there, and then you kind of find your way. And I think there's no thought about what they're actually doing. Dude working in irrigation, it could be any, that's just where he ended up, but he's figured out a way to make money. He has these connections, and he's kind of a name. He made a name for himself. And, but the driving force, at least so I could see him from my own experience, is to escape the stories that they heard, that they think are still coming after them.
Oh, I see.
That past is coming after you, and you have to accumulate as much money as you can to keep it at bay, right. And I think I'm as prey to that mentality as anyone, if you have a family and stuff, maybe some of that even gets intensified or whatever. But I think it has less to do. The drive comes less to do with what they're actually doing, the business they're in, than trying to get to this certain place. I know I referenced, the middle and this idea of purgatory and stuff. And I live over in Culver City, and I live by the Baldwin Hills. And if you go there in the evening, it's really beautiful, actually. There's just, these sloping roads that go up this hill and this huge staircase. And you just everyone, this very incredible cross section of people come there every day to go up the steps and kind of punish themselves and walk up this hill. And they're just trying to get to the top. And it to me, it is the slopes of purgatory, the Dante, and that's what it feels like. You're moving towards some plateau where you once I get there, it'll all stop, but it doesn't. It never stops.
It makes me think again about me and my peers, and for so many of us, if it's we do not have those stories chasing us. The stories have long since faded of poverty generations behind. So we're it's all about not having to work a quote unquote real job. And, is eviction looming? Bring it on. Fine. Yeah. That's literally the attitude. Do your younger characters have any of that in them, or are they all close enough to ancestral poverty that nobody is shrugging in the face of getting thrown on the street?
I don't know. It's weird. I feel like these characters come out of a context that wasn't as dire as their parents or their grandparents, and I think probably have more of a sense of entitlement, and kind of in the first story, it's kind of about this kid playing high school basketball, but there's this whole sub story about basically his family's collapsing,
right,
and he's too caught up in his own adolescent dreams to really. My hope is that the reader sees it if the protagonist doesn't, and I don't think he realizes how on the edge he and his family is, and I kind of know this from my family. Your parents protect you from that, and you kind of when I think of all the stuff that happened with my family, I can go back and kind of piece things together, right. But my parents wanted to keep the horror that was kind of chasing them. They wanted to keep us away from it, and I think these characters have some vague sense of their circumstances, but also they don't appreciate it enough, and they're also I think this is a very autobiographical element to them. They're lazy. I mean, they do work. They don't mind work, but like the way they operate in life is totally kind of lazy and irrational. And
what does it mean to be lazy? I guess we should maybe lay that out. What laziness manifests itself how in these characters?
Maybe lazy is maybe a better term is dreamy. Like, I'll just sit on this couch for a few hours and think about how great things will be, eventually.
Right.
And I probably do that every day. And so I think they just don't know how to get from where they are to whatever they're dreaming about. And I know that feeling incredibly well, like in college, like, I wanted to, if I could have like written my own ticket, I want to write for The Simpsons, but like, I didn't go to Harvard. I literally know no one who could, how would you even do that? I might as well like, it seemed like impossible. And I would think about it all, but I didn't know how to do it. And I think I was a little bit, if I was maybe less timid or something, maybe I could have figured something out. I also never actually sat down and wrote a Simpsons script. I just thought I should be given that job.
I see.
Because I watched it a lot and got all the jokes.
I'm very familiar with the canon.
Yeah.
I know all the character model sheets. I could envision them walking through Springfield. I got this.
Right. Yeah. It's the only language other than English I'm fluent in. So. Yeah, and I think one reason I ended up kind of writing fiction is because it is just something you can do on your own at no cost. And I think that is, in my mind, that makes it the best or the most, I don't know, one of the French New Wave filmmakers had some quote about like, until film is the means of production or whatever is like as affordable as a pen, it won't be a true art form. And we're probably getting pretty close to that, Yeah. It is becoming incredibly more, democratic or whatever. But
you describe so many of these younger characters and middlemen as driving their crappy cars, as we've alluded to, and dressing badly and just being shambles. Why? How did they get so shambolic? I guess that's what I'm most curious about. In such a short time as well. They're 30 years old.
That's a good question. I look in the mirror every day and ask myself that. I don't know. I think that maybe that goes down to Flannery O'Connor's mystery of personality. Like, I don't know. From my own perspective, I can't walk into a mall or any type of clothing store without going into a kind of weird panic, and I literally never buy clothes, and I don't know why. It's some weird thing. I don't know. I went to Catholic school for 16 years, and we got to wear a uniform, and I love that. I love not having to make any decisions about couture. Sure. And and there's, as far as like the automobiles, that is, I think that's a very, maybe in like heavy driving places like Southern California or Texas or something, like I always felt like, I remember driving to school in high school. My grandmother died, and I got her 85 Ford Tempo, and she smoked so much the windows were yellow. It was incredible. And I was working at Kmart, driving my Ford Tempo that barely worked, and I would pick up my friends, and we, drive to school. And I just remember the essential feeling was like the gas gauge hovering around empty and the heat gauge hovering around hot. Like it is all going to collapse at any second.
You have one eye on each of them, just not on the road naturally. Right. And this is how some of us live, I suppose, during certain, hopefully just our 20s, but who knows?
Yeah, or beyond. But that feeling that like I have that feeling of, if I can just get the car there,
right,
I'll worry about what comes next. Like, I just need to get to school today. And then like you get out of school and you're like, oh yeah, I have to get back in that death trap of a car and try and make it home or to work. And yeah, that is always carried on. That kind of like, I feel like the history of my family could be written through all our car breakdowns. It's just like, there's just no escape.
Right.
So Yeah, that kind of, I think shambolic is a really good word to describe it. You're kind of just doing your best. You probably could be doing more, but like, TV's on, so I'm going to enjoy life a little bit and not figure out a way to fix my car that is never going to be fixed. Right. Yeah.
The whole sense of Southern California, or Los Angeles proper, being a heavy driving place, it still obtains, but less so every year, especially in the 21st century. And we mentioned before the smog, how when you were growing up, I'm sure there were plenty of days you were, in Long Beach, you're not really going to see downtown anyway, but we're close to downtown. You couldn't see downtown. Yeah. Couldn't see downtown from downtown. Yeah. There's a Los Angeles that I read about in books set in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s that seems to rapidly be growing less comparable to the Los Angeles of today. Do you get that sense that the city itself has become considerably different since you were growing up, or is that more of a sense the world has about it, and that from the inside it's kind of the same as it's always been?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. I still feel like Southern California is the place where people want to come to, whether, I grew up with a lot of kids who were, second generation, their parents from Mexico or Central America. And, they didn't want their kids to speak Spanish, you know what I mean? And they were here, and that's still, I think that's the defining story of Southern California right now is those new generations coming in, usually from Mexico and Central America. And that's the future. And, but I don't think that is any different from at any other point in time. It's just this circumstances, and this is the the group coming in now is no different than, when the Irish are coming into New York and stuff like that, or wherever. So I don't feel any particular difference. I feel like I don't know. I'm really hopeful. I feel like LA is the place to be, and I can kind of say that in terms of like a cultural context as far as film and books and comedy and all that stuff. But I still feel like the future is kind of getting written here. That makes it kind of a hell on earth in some ways.
Really?
It's like a crucible. Like there's winners and losers, and it's fascinating to watch. And I look, the suburbs of Southern California were kind of underwritten by the aerospace industry in a lot of ways, and I feel like that world is kind of, still there, but a lot of it has changed and gone away. And so I don't know, there's kind of these new, I think LA is still trying to figure out itself. I think it is at some sort of weird generational crossroads.
And we now have, you mentioned the immigrants from Mexico and Central America who've been coming here a long time, but we now have generations descended from them who are pissed because they didn't get to learn Spanish growing up. To say to their grandparents, why didn't you teach my mom and dad Spanish? Because now I don't know it. And now in Los Angeles, it would be really nice to know Spanish. You know what I mean? Like things have sort of come back around on themselves. Los Angeles had dreams in the mid 20th century, and whether or not those are thought to have panned out, the situation is now, it's a different playing field now, is it not?
I think so. I don't know. I think there's still definitely some entrenched class things as always. But I would only hope that it's, for me, when I see going out in the Inland Empire and stuff, that's kind of where things are happening in a sense, as far as the changing face of neighborhoods, and that's where the middle class is kind of ending up. The kind of a more mixed middle class.
The middle class frontier is over there in the Inland Empire.
So, a lot of the black families I know out there, that's where they wanted to move to, get a house out in Victorville, and you can afford, and I have cousins and stuff out there who, I don't know, they don't look at Southern California as kind of like the gold rush place where you get rich. It's like kind of, I can actually get, my cousin's like put herself through nursing school and like,
how much does the question of when you get out there to Victorville or wherever and you have a house, how much does the question of what do I do now intrigue you as a writer or as just a person? It always seems like that would start dominating your psyche as soon as you get the house out there on the fringes of the middle class frontier. Just the whole what now? Like, I guess I can't really walk anywhere. I mean, like, what do I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's pretty surreal. There's a great novel that came out about 3 years ago called Model Home by Eric Puckner, which is just brilliant. I feel like it's one of the best domestic novels of the last 10 years. And it's kind of all about that. And it's much of it is set out in those places, kind of the high desert. And then my boss, when I had my sales job, I had a lot of accounts out there, and he referred to it as the edge. And I go out to these places, like kind of these new track houses are being built, and it's literally a cul-de-sac. You drive into a cul-de-sac, and there's a wall, and on the other side of the wall is a vast wasteland. I mean, with tumbleweed blowing, and
backyard wasteland.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just goes to show you there's no high enough premium you can place in America on owning a home,
right?
And
no setting is too terrible if it's your home.
And I think I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to live out there, but like, I don't begrudge anyone who's trying to find a house, in a safe neighborhood. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like we can kind of, for families coming from South LA or East LA, who are getting jobs in the trades out there, it's like this is kind of a fresh start, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, but those neighborhoods it's a lunar landscape. It's surreal. But you know what? I wonder, what did Orange County look like in 1950? I mean, it was orange groves, and now we kind of all that's gone, and it just feels like it's always been there, but it hasn't. And so who knows what the desert's going to look like in 50 years? I mean, it's kind of terrifying.
Right. I mean, Orange County has some good ramen shops now and such. It's come a long way, but. I mean, are these lunar desert neighborhoods the places where the new Richard Yatesian suburban narratives are to be written? I mean, are they emerging from? Do you see them emerging from those sorts of middle class frontiers? As we've been saying.
I think so. Another book I read recently called it's by Dana Johnson called Elsewhere, California, and it's set. I think in the 80s, but it's set in South LA and the high desert, and she kind of captures that really, really well. It's a beautiful book, and I mean I think that's what I mean. Like Orange County has more of an entrenched, I mean, South Orange County is one of the richest enclaves in the world, and whereas you get out, once you get past Yerba Linda on the 91 and you're into Corona and Riverside and south to Temecula and out there, like it's kind of more open territory. You know what I mean? I feel like there's less entrenched, more opportunities. And, so 30 years ago, it was like the uncle character in the story who that's where the money was because that's where they were building houses, and I remember a story or something my grandfather said was relayed to me by my uncle when they moved from Boston out to California. My uncle came out here first, and my grandfather came to visit. This was in the 60s, like early 60s or mid 60s, and my grandpa just was like looking around LA, and he said, a guy could make $1 million just painting doors out here. You know what I mean? Like there seemed to be like so much work, you know, whether it's building houses and stuff. And I mean, that's what's been going on the last 30 years out in the Inland Empire. I mean, it's definitely cratered in some sense, but you still feel like that's where the growth is and stuff. But the thing is about Southern California, I feel very loyal to it, and I think I know it pretty well, but there are vast stretches. It's so big. Like I could not tell you what's going on in Ventura. I've spent no time there. I have no idea. Like I've spent very little time in the San Gabriel Valley, you know, like, you know, so, but I don't know. I'm hoping, you know, as far as like LA literature and stuff in a way of documenting it, you know, like a couple writers I've mentioned, like Eric Puckner and Dana Johnson, Victoria Patterson, she writes about South Orange County in a really great way. And there's a collection called Every Night is Ladies' Night by a guy named Michael Aime Becerra, I think. And that's kind of set in San Gabriel Valley, and it's great. And then like, I love that stuff, you know? So I think like those places on the edges are kind of more interesting. I feel like the cities have kind of filled up with the cool, hip, sophisticated people and like the freaks of, you know, not the freaks, but the people who are kind of like, whose stories might be, I think the kind of stories that the hip folks downtown want to tell are actually happening out in the suburbs now. So I don't know. I'm just talking out my ass. I have no idea.
Well, that's what we encourage. Yeah. And finally, you mentioned having spent some time in Northern California yourself as well. And there's a story in here that goes between, it's mainly in San Francisco and Berkeley, but it has a bit where a character goes down to Los Angeles for a little while. What do you think about this? I mean, the divide that people talk about in California is north-south. You've got Northern California and Southern California, San Francisco and Los Angeles. The real divide seems to me to be east-west. You've got the west side with San Francisco and Los Angeles, and the east where these lunar landscapes are, where the middle-class frontier is. I mean, does that hold any water to you, that the real distinction being east-west?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there is a north-south divide, but I think it's the distinctions are smaller.
Narcissism of minor differences.
Was exactly the term I was looking for. Yeah, east-west. I mean, I I've heard like kind of like Riverside or like Inland is kind of the red state of Southern California, you know, and it's kind of maybe more conservative or, I can feel it, but it's like it's more rural. It's more affordable, like coastal property. If you're at the beach, like surfing, of the whitest sports, surfing is up there, you know what I mean? And that's kind of generational. And so, yeah, I feel like there is that divide. And it's the same in Northern California, kind of once you start going east towards Sacramento and basically, you know, the Central Valley, you know. I think that's I think it's pretty true. So.
I've been speaking here at the Los Angeles Review of Books, dignified with the article, the Los Angeles Review of Books headquarters here in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, with Jim Gavin, author of the book of stories Middlemen, which is his debut. They're mostly Southern California stories, a little bit in Northern California as well. Jim, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall. You can find much more at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.